Crypto was supposed to give people control over their wealth, a way to transact across the globe person to person without governments, banks, or middlemen taking a cut or calling the shots. It was supposed to be about financial freedom. And then a parade of chancers, fraudsters, and the occasional just butterfingers showed up and turned a fair chunk of it into a cautionary tale. So today we're walking through the 5 biggest losses in crypto history in the order they happened, how each one came about, and how you can avoid being part of the next one. My name is Guy, and you're watching The Coin Bureau. Our story doesn't begin with a fraud, but with a bin bag. Back in 2009, when Bitcoin was a curiosity swapped between hobbyists for pennies, a Welsh IT worker named James Howells mined 8,000 coins. He did exactly what every sensible crypto evangelist now tells you to do. He held his own keys, he kept them well away from any exchange, and stored them on a hard drive at home. The single private key controlling all 8,000 coins lived on that one drive. No copies, no backup. Then, in the summer of 2013, during a clear-out, the drive went in the bin. Out with the rubbish, off to the Docksway landfill site in Newport, and into something like 100,000 tons of buried waste. Those 8,000 BTC are of course worth a fortune today, hundreds of millions of pounds, and Howells has spent more than a decade trying to dig them back out. The local council refused him permission to excavate at every turn, and in January 2025, the High Court ended the saga for good, ruling that the drive became council property the moment it was thrown away, and that his case had no realistic prospect of success. The site is now being sealed over and turned into a solar farm. So, the money is to all practical purposes gone. Alright, but what's the lesson here, given that Howells did most things right? Well, holding your own keys doesn't magically protect you. It transfers the entire risk onto, well, you. The seed phrase is the asset, which means you need to write it down on paper and don't save a copy on any electronic device. Keep copies in more than one place and, make sure you're being careful about what you're throwing out. Now, 5 years after Howells binned his entire fortune, a very different kind of disaster was reaching its peak, one where the victims handed over their money willingly. By late 2017, you couldn't move in crypto circles without hearing the name BitConnect. Yes, the pitch was seductively simple. Deposit your money and BitConnect's proprietary volatility software, a clever trading bot apparently, would work the markets on your behalf and pay you around 1% a day. Compounded, that works out to roughly 40% a month, and it was, supposedly, guaranteed. The bot, of course, did not exist. When American prosecutors later picked the scheme apart, they confirmed there was no algorithm and no trading software of any kind. BitConnect was an old-fashioned Ponzi scheme, paying early investors with the money pouring in from new ones and topping it off with a referral pyramid that paid generous commissions to anyone who recruited fresh deposits. When it collapsed in January 2018, it had swallowed around $2.4 billion, and the US Department of Justice would go on to call it the largest cryptocurrency fraud charged at the time. And the maddening part is that the warning signs were everywhere. The returns defied basic arithmetic. The structure rewarded recruitment over any actual product, and yet the token price kept climbing and the rooms kept filling up until the doubt was simply drowned out by the noise. Now, there are happily 2 cheap defenses here. First, the yield test. If nobody can explain in a single clear sentence where the return actually comes from, then walk away, and quickly. Second, the referral test. If recruiting new people pays better than the product itself, then the recruiting is the product, and you're looking at a Ponzi. As a general rule, guaranteed and returns should never share a sentence with the word crypto. Okay, fast forward to 2022, and crypto had morphed from a fringe experiment into a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and the failures grew to match. In early May of that year, the Terra ecosystem collapsed in one of the most devastating implosions the space has ever seen, erasing roughly $40 billion in value within days. Terra, built by Do Kwon's Terraform Labs, centered on two linked tokens. UST was an algorithmic stablecoin designed to hold a $1 peg, but unlike asset-backed stablecoins, it held no cash or bonds in reserve. Instead, the peg relied on a mint and burn mechanism with its sister token, Luna. You could always swap $1 of UST for $1 worth of newly minted Luna and back again, with arbitrage theoretically pinning UST to the dollar. Demand for UST was propped up almost entirely by Anchor Protocol, which offered an eye-watering and frankly unsustainable yield of around 20%. Then, between the 7th and the 9th of May, the reason that yield was unsustainable became painfully clear. Large sell-offs and withdrawals knocked UST off its peg, and as panicked holders rushed for the exit, the mechanism minted enormous quantities of Luna to compensate, hyperinflating its supply from hundreds of millions of tokens into the trillions. Luna crashed from above $80 to fractions of a cent, while UST sank far below $1 and never came back. Terra had stockpiled roughly $3 billion in Bitcoin to defend the peg, deployed it during the crisis, and watched the reserves vanish as the death spiral rolled on. The blockchain was eventually halted, and the fallout was brutal. The collapse wiped out retail and institutional investors alike and triggered a wave of contagion that helped topple Three Arrows Capital, Celsius, Voyager, and eventually FTX. But we'll get to that. Do Kwon was arrested in Montenegro in 2023 and in December 2025 was sentenced by a US court to 15 years in prison for what the judge called fraud, quote, on an epic generational scale. But the Terra collapse was only the first domino. The last one to fall that year was the biggest, and it caught out the people who thought they were being careful. FTX was the second largest exchange in the world, advertising during the Super Bowl, with Tom Brady, Steph Curry, and Larry David lending their faces to the brand. It looked like a safe, polished, quasi-regulated American institution, and that was precisely the problem. The more trustworthy it appeared, the more comfortable people felt leaving their crypto sitting on it. Then, in November 2022, it emerged that around $8 billion in customer funds had simply gone missing. Behind the scenes, FTX had handed its sister trading firm, Alameda Research, a secret exemption from the rules every other user faced, allowing it to borrow billions of dollars of customer money. Money people believed was sitting untouched in FTX's custody. Founder Sam Bankman-Fried was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 25 years, and in June 2026, a federal appeals court upheld that conviction, describing the evidence against him as robust. Now, the lesson from FTX is the one worth holding on to the longest. An exchange is not a vault, it's an IOU. When your coins sit on an exchange, you don't actually own crypto. You own the exchange's promise to give it back when you ask. But when the exchange goes under, that promise puts you at the back of a very long queue of creditors, often waiting years to recover pennies on the dollar, if indeed anything at all. Which is why the single highest value habit of all in crypto is self-custody. Anything you genuinely cannot afford to lose belongs off the exchange and in a wallet whose keys you control. Bearing in mind, as poor old James Howells reminds us, that this only works if you keep your backups in order. Which brings us finally to the most recent disaster on our list, and a very different beast from the frauds and fumbles that came before it. There was no villain here, no fake bot, and no missing billions. Just a market that had gorged itself on risk, and a single piece of news that caused it to puke it all back up in one go. On Friday, the 10th of October 2025, with Bitcoin trading near an all-time high of around $122,000, President Trump posted on Truth Social announcing a 100% tariff on all Chinese imports. The timing could hardly have been worse. The post landed late on a Friday after traditional US markets had closed for the weekend. But crypto, of course, never closes and has no circuit breakers to pause a panic. Open interest across the market was sitting near a record $217 billion, which is a polite way of saying traders were leveraged all the way up the wazoo. What followed was the largest liquidation event in crypto history. As prices fell, leverage positions were forced closed, which pushed prices lower still, which triggered yet more liquidations, a doom loop feeding on itself. In a single 24-hour window, more than $19 billion in leverage positions were wiped out, roughly 9 times larger than any previous event, and around 1.6 million traders were liquidated. Bitcoin fell about 14% to near $105,000, while altcoins fared far worse, some briefly collapsing 40 to 70%. The infrastructure groaned under the strain too. Exchanges seized up, interfaces froze, and traders found themselves locked out of their own accounts at the exact moment they needed to act. Tellingly though, no major firm collapsed in the aftermath. Unlike Terra and FTX, this wasn't a fraud unraveling, it was a deleveraging event, a painful and largely mechanical flush of excess risk rather than a house of cards finally falling down. Which makes it kind of the perfect note to end on because it shows how the danger has changed shape, from outright crooks to the more structural risk we build up ourselves when everyone gets a little too confident all at once. So, 5 disasters spread across more than a decade, and not one of them was truly unforeseeable. A fortune treated like a spare USB stick, a return that defied arithmetic, a stablecoin with no engine underneath it, an exchange mistaken for a bank vault, and a market so loaded with borrowed money that a single post could knock $19 billion out of it. Now, what's encouraging is that the defenses are simple, free, and entirely within your control. Before you put money into anything, ask where the yield actually comes from. If no one can explain it in a single sentence, you have your answer. Be suspicious of anything that pays you more for bringing in your friends than for the product itself. Treat every exchange as a temporary holding pen rather than a home, and move anything you can't afford to lose into self-custody. Then keep your recovery phrase backed up, offline, in more than one place, and test it before you rely on it. And if you ever do reach for leverage, size your position so that an ordinary run-of-the-mill bad day can't take you out entirely. None of the people in these stories were stupid, and most of them weren't even that reckless. They were ordinary investors who let their guard down for a moment, usually because everyone around them was doing exactly the same. The one thing these survivors had in common was that they kept asking the boring, skeptical questions while everyone else was busy celebrating. So, that is the real takeaway, folks. The biggest risk in crypto isn't the technology, it's human nature. And that, happily, is the one variable you actually get to manage yourself. Well, that's about it from me for today, but let me know if you were caught up in any of these disasters and what lessons you learned from the experience in the comments down below. And is the next crypto catastrophe just a matter of time, or have we finally learned our lessons? Anyway, take care out there, stay skeptical, and I'll see you again soon. This is Guy, signing off.